We welcome you into our House of Government. We welcome you in peace and all future business that we must deal with in the days and years to come. I just want to give you a brief explanation on what's going to take place. As you are well aware, there is very little history of the Coast Salish documented. Our elders, our ancestors, strictly restricted us from exposing our culture, our sacred ways. This is the first time our sacred ceremony will be shown to so many. And it is very sacred. We are going to ask, especially the reporters and the non-native members here, to respect what you are going to witness. It is not a show. It is not a performance. It is a cleansing and renewal of life. It is used for many purposes, but only the families that are members are allowed to use this sacred ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, the document that to be signed will be signed by our Prime Minister, Premier British Columbia, and witnesses from those areas, departments. Also the signers are Chief Edward John, Chief Joe Mathias, Sophie Pierre, Miles Richardson, and Tom Sampson. The First Nations group will also have a witness to witness the signing. At this time, At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I call on your Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, to come and sign this document, the British Columbia Treaty Commission Agreement.
Who is the witness for him? Who is his witness?
Right up here.
Down in the front, please. Down. Cameraman.
Just right up here.
Yes, right on yours. A very historical moment, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give the Prime Minister a big hand. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on with the ceremonies. We call on the Premier of British Columbia to come forward. Mr. Harcourt. Ladies and gentlemen, after 150 plus years, Premier and Prime Minister didn't read the fine print. They just turned our country back over to us. Thank you. Chief Edward John, come forward, please. Chief Ed John. Thank you very much, Chief Ed John, member of the task force, one of the key people instrumental in bringing us to this table, Chief Ed John. We now call on Chief Joe Mathias. Chief Joe Mathias, another member of our task force, another individual who's worked tirelessly for our efforts of First Nations people. Thank you, Joe Mathias. Sophie Pierre, please come forward. Sophie Pierre, another member of the task force who's working at the front line on behalf of the First Nations of British Columbia. Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you very much. We now call on Miles Richardson to come forward, please. Thank you very much, Miles Richardson. Another member of our task force representing the First Nations. Thank you very much, Miles, for your tireless efforts on behalf of our task force and First Nations. Now we call on Tetsaluk Tom Sampson. Thank you very much, Tom Sampson. Tetsaluk, another individual who's worked very hard in front of First Nations. I thank all our representatives. We now call on Honourable Prime Minister Brian Mulroney to make his remarks at this time. Brian Mulroney, ladies and gentlemen.
Master of Ceremonies, elders and chiefs, and Premier Harcourt, distinguished guests, dear friends, chers amis. Master of Ceremonies said that Premier Harcourt and I didn't read the fine print. But I did. And right down on the bottom of the third page it says, the Squamish Nation is going to get a grant from Ottawa tomorrow morning for a new air conditioning system for this hall. And that was only on page 3. You should have seen page 4. Well, it's truly an honor for me to join you here today to mark a major step towards a new relationship between the First Nations and Canada and British Columbia. 86 years ago, Joe Capilano of the Squamish people worked on these same lands to found the Indian Rights Association. And I'm told that from this very place, he set in motion a process that brought Sir Wilfrid Laurier to British Columbia in 1910 to travel and to meet with Indian leaders. I would like to believe that we are following in his footsteps today. We want to make just and effective treaties here in British Columbia. At the heart of this process is the British Columbia Treaty Commission, an institution proposed by First Nations and brought to life by the cooperative efforts of British Columbia Summit Chiefs, Canada, and British Columbia. The role of Summit Chiefs in transforming this vision into reality has been and will be pivotal. I know that many Indian people from British Columbia have contributed ideas and support to the Commission, but I would like particularly to acknowledge the contributions, the very significant and highly personal contributions made by task force members Edward John, Joe Mathias, and Miles Richardson, who are here today. I know that they were backed up by other summit leaders, including Chiefs Wendy Grant, Sophie Pierre, and Tom Sampson, and I know that this steadfast support has brought us here today. I can let you in on a little secret. Every time Tom Siddon would return from British Columbia for a Tuesday morning P&P meeting, he would hand me a handwritten letter. And after a while, before I even opened it, I was able to say, "Tom, tell Wendy Grant I promise I'll be there." And I'd also like to congratulate Premier Harcourt for his commitment to the just resolution of comprehensive claims in this province. I think that, may I just say what we all know, is that his support, the support of Mike Harcourt, in bringing today about, has been absolutely indispensable. And I want to thank him for his leadership. And finally, I do want to mention two federal ministers, Bill McKnight, who broke the logjam and started to bring British Columbia into the process years ago, and Tom Siddon, who completed the job. It is fitting that an Indian Affairs Minister from British Columbia, who had such a commitment towards your well-being and to justice for the Native peoples in British Columbia, it is fitting that Tom Siddon be the one responsible for such an important milestone in British Columbia history, and I want to congratulate Tom here today. The Government of Canada is working towards the rapid settlement of differences with all Aboriginal peoples. Much progress has been achieved already. In fact, my government has signed more agreements and resolved more areas of difference than any in our history, and yet all it indicates is how far we have to go. But the most important indicator of the new relationship we are forging is the Charlottetown Agreement, unanimously accepted by the Prime Minister of Canada, the provincial premiers, leaders of the territories, and representatives of the Aboriginal peoples. That agreement is now placed before Canadians as the essential expression of this fundamental change. It is an agreement which represents the best efforts of Premier Harcourt and all of his provincial colleagues, the territorial leaders, the Aboriginal leaders, and may I, in a very special way, inasmuch as that you hear a lot about what took place in that room, particularly from people who weren't there, inasmuch as I was there, may I pay a very special and genuine tribute today to Chief Ovid Mekradze, who fought an extraordinarily successful fight for all the Aboriginal peoples of Canada and came out with victory in his hand. The Charlottetown Agreement is ultimately an expression of respect, all the more significant because it is so long overdue for the fundamental role of Native peoples in this country's character. It also represents a commitment by Aboriginal Canadians to work together in good faith with provincial and federal governments down the road to self-government within Canada. And I was heartened to hear Chief Mekradze inviting Native Canadians to vote yes in the October 26th referendum. Our best hope for a favorable outcome of this great national consultation is that a strong majority of Canadian citizens will put the future of their country above all considerations, and the rights of Native peoples are very much engaged in this consultation, and the time has come for Canadians, all Canadians, from British Columbia to Newfoundland and Labrador, new Canadians and old, French-speaking and English-speaking Canadians, the time has come for all Canadians to say, among other important things, yes, a solid, generous yes to the Native peoples of Canada. It is long overdue and time that it be said. I thought Chief Mekradze put it well when he urged Aboriginal people to vote yes, because he said we have to stand up as a people not only for our treaty rights as a nation, but we have to stand up as well for Canada. The Charlottetown Agreement marks the historic conclusion of a debate which has taken too long, and it ensures that the future course of your young people, the young people in your communities, will evolve as you principally decide it ought to. The recognition of the inherent right of self-government is a recognition of your historic and inherited autonomy. After centuries of neglect or disregard, take your pick, the Aboriginal peoples have themselves forged a new relationship as full and valued members of the Canadian community. The intent of all of the leaders at Charlottetown was simply to see that fundamental fairness be observed and that some justice finally be done. With the ratification of the Charlottetown Agreement for the first time, all of Canada's peoples, those of the First Nations as much as the most recent Canadians, I was at a ceremony this morning welcoming 157 new Canadians from 41 different countries who have got Canadian citizenship this morning. Well, all of their rights, the historic rights of our First Nations and the rights of those citizens who became Canadians this morning, I think on October 26th, as a result of your initiatives and your thoughtful pursuit of the objective, those rights will be united in a national venture which is as bold and bright as our forefathers could ever have imagined, and which could indeed be the beginning of assuring another 125 years of unity and prosperity for all Canadians. But let me return to the vital business of this special day. A British Columbia Land Claims Commission was first promised by Sir Wilfrid Laurier in 1910. And some of the media say it takes me time to fulfill my promises. Well, this is a long time for Canada to honor a fundamental commitment. But on October 23rd, 1990, I visited with the chiefs in Vancouver. And I was told by Chief Mathias this was the first such meeting that a Canadian Prime Minister had had since Sir Wilfrid's time. And so I came back again, soon thereafter. And I indicated that I would work towards the objective for which you had struggled so long. And I went back and I discussed this with my cabinet colleagues and with the officials of the government who are here today. And here we are in British Columbia today, the Prime Minister, the Premier of British Columbia, the chiefs, and we've finally delivered on Sir Wilfrid's promise. When I met with First Nations leaders in Vancouver on October 1990, again, to discuss how treaty negotiations might proceed in British Columbia, you told me that we needed, and this was your quote, a keeper of the process, unquote. What was envisioned was a tripartite, arm's-length body with public credibility and stature that would allow the treaty process to proceed without undue influence from any particular party. You also told me that the approach would have to be tailored to the needs of the people of British Columbia. The document that we have signed today establishes that keeper of the process and reflects our joint dedication to a made in British Columbia approach for reaching just settlements. The treaty negotiations process will be open to all First Nations in British Columbia. The first task of the Treaty Commission will be to identify those First Nations ready to begin negotiations. The Treaty Commission will set the conditions for effective negotiations by overseeing the treaty process itself. It will coordinate the start of negotiations, monitor their progress, and help resolve disputes when requested. We hope that the Commission will create an environment that will enable the new relationship between Canada and the Government of British Columbia and First Nations to flourish. When I introduced the Native Agenda in the House of Commons not quite 2 years ago, I set a target for all treaties in British Columbia to be concluded by the year 2000. That development will require a major commitment of time and energy and will involve compromise and adjustments by all parties. However, not to reach that agreement would be much worse for all concerned. I think that, we get criticized for in this business for everything you do. Aboriginal rights, well, they're too ill-defined and they're too loose. The Treaty Commission, well, this is going to give away British Columbia. And you hear this from the extremists and some interested people every day. But perhaps I could tell you what I think this will happen. I think that these treaties and the manner in which we propose to handle it will create an atmosphere of certainty that will support investment in British Columbia's economy, particularly in the natural resources sectors. Financial benefits to claimants will provide a pool of capital for development, and there will be spin-off benefits throughout British Columbia for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples alike. This day, an historic day for Aboriginal peoples, is also a very good day for all people in British Columbia. And First Nations control over their land and resources will encourage, I think, a vibrant and self-sufficient native economy. The Government of Canada has committed itself to provide a fair share of the cost of settlements, including the resources to meet all federal obligations under this new Made in British Columbia negotiating process. We believe the province of British Columbia will make a similar commitment, and we look forward to continuing the progress and to accomplishing it in partnership with the province of British Columbia and British Columbia's First Nations. Avec l'aide de la Commission et de la bonne volonté de toutes les parties, nous pouvons inaugurer ensemble une nouvelle ère de respect et de collaboration entre les Canadiens non autochtones et les descendants des premiers habitants de ce pays. Les traités que nous signerons en Colombie-Britannique sont un investissement dans notre avenir. Le 26 octobre prochain, je suis convaincu que tous les Canadiens souscriront à cette initiative de réconciliation et qu'ils affirmeront que le jour est enfin venu d'offrir à tous dignité, justice et prospérité. Voter non le 26 octobre signifierait, entre autres conséquences, qu'on refuserait l'autonomie gouvernementale aux Autochtones, et je crois que la majorité des Canadiens et Canadiennes ne souhaitent pas créer cette situation, à mon sens, nettement inacceptable. On October 26th, a no vote would mean, among other things, saying no to Aboriginal self-government, and I believe that most Canadians will seek to avoid such a fundamentally unacceptable result. The First Peoples of Canada have become formally, in fact and indeed, partners, genuine partners of all other Canadians. And finally, the dream of your forefathers has been recognized. Your dignity restored, your partnership valued, your role in our unlimited future embraced. The establishment of the British Columbia Treaty Commission is not an end in itself, but a milestone recording progress. It is time for all of us to reach out one to the other, a time to understand and a time to heal. October 26th is also a time to understand and to heal, a time for all citizens to affirm who we are and how much we truly love the country we share. We have walked many steps together, some of them haltingly in the darkness, and some proudly and confidently in the sunlight that warms our hearts and opens our spirits. Today is one such step, another such step, although we have many yet to take together. As a Canadian and as a Prime Minister of Canada, I am honored to take this step with you all here today. I am honored to have been the Prime Minister of Canada called upon to redeem a fundamental promise made to your peoples so many decades ago that Canadians, for whatever reasons, failed to honor. Today, on this stage in British Columbia, the Government of Canada has lived up to its commitment to the Native peoples, and we will honor every provision in the documents to which I and Premier Harcourt have committed our signatures. And though I regret that I can't stay with you longer because of prior commitments here and in Saskatchewan, where early tomorrow, I'll be presiding at a land entitlement ceremony. I thank you, chiefs, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, for the fine print I didn't see, for the air conditioning that we will deliver on time. I thank you all for your hospitality, and I wish you strength and prosperity to you and to your children and to all of theirs for decades and decades to come. May God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Brian Mulroney. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Well, thank you. Mentioned that we have become equal partners, and we very welcome you to our table. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, Premier Mike Harcourt.
Thank you, Willie, and elders, chiefs, honored guests, good afternoon to this magnificent day. And I can tell you I am going to speak to the Prime Minister about not only the air conditioning, I'm going to be speaking to him about using priority post, because there's a very large meeting, Mr. Prime Minister, that is taking here that Chief Mercady and Chief Matthias are going to be hosting sometime in mid-October, so we have to use priority post. I would like to start by thanking the Squamish Nation for inviting us here to your territory today for this historic celebration, and by thanking the Coast Salish Nations for co-hosting this very special event. And a number of you I've had the honor of working with over many years on housing and other issues, and I think it is a magnificent day for all of us, British Columbia. And I know many of you have put a lot of work into making this historic day a very special one. From the organizational work that's gone on before this day, and when I spoke with Chief Matthias, he said, boy, the last 2 weeks have been real tough trying to get together for this, this significant day in the lives of all of us here in British Columbia. And I'd also like to congratulate the Squamish Nation for the recent opening of this magnificent facility. It will serve your people well for many years to come. And I note, Chief, that you have a basketball court in here. And I saw the number 22 flash up on there, which was my old basketball playing number. And the reason it was so sentimental for me is I used to have a brush cut in those days. Some people don't believe me, but it's true. It's a little thinner now, the brush. There are many people deserving of recognition today. Many of you here to join in witnessing this, this very special occasion. And many who have gone before, who cannot be here with us today, but whose spirits fill this room. And I'd especially like to thank the First Nations Task Group for their part in bringing us to this historic point. Miles Richardson. I first met Buddy in 1987 when I'd just become the leader of my party in a very difficult, hotly contested leadership contest of one. And I went to his home in Haida, which we non-Aboriginals call the Queen Charlottes. And we talked about our commitment to Aboriginal self-government and negotiating on the land question. We're here today to start doing it, buddy. And Sophie Pierre, I remember visiting with Sophie and looking out at the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains at St. Mary's. And Sophie told me her dreams and her vision for her people in terms of economic self-sufficiency and the integrity of Aboriginal heritage and culture. Well, today, Sophie, we're taking an important step together. And Tom Sampson, opportunities for Aboriginal culture and the new partnership that we're embarking on here today. And Chief Edward John, a fellow barrister. We don't read the fine print. That's what we hire solicitors for, right, Ed? Right, Mr. Prime Minister? I met with Chief John and the Carriacou County Council at Fort St. James to talk about our commitment to the Treaty Commission process and about the opportunities for Aboriginal people that would be created by the new University of Northern British Columbia. And Chief Joe Mathias, who was one of the most eloquent and passionate orators that I have ever seen or heard. A very wise and gentle human being. And I was truly humbled listening in the tradition of Simon Lucas and the other great orators of our Aboriginal leaders, listening a few years ago to Chief Mathias in the old Longhouse, just a few meters from here, as he described the history of his people and the just future that he hoped we would share. Well, today, Chief Mathias, we are all sharing in that vision of a just future. And to each of these 5 members of the First Nations Task Group and all of the Aboriginal leaders who are here, I want to acknowledge the work, the determination, and the integrity that has brought us to this point. And it's truly an honor for Minister Andrew Petter and I to be able to participate in these ceremonies, to express our shared commitment to a new beginning and a new partnership with the First Nations in this province. This historic ceremony today signals a new direction based on respect and recognition of the Aboriginal peoples in British Columbia. And after more than a century, we finally have the political will in this province to reach just and honorable settlements with our First Nations. We are here today committing to that process that is being developed in a spirit of cooperation here in British Columbia, a process that is long overdue, and an example, Mr. Prime Minister, of how Canada, the province, and the First Nations can work in a spirit of cooperation. The Treaty Commission is a new creation. I hope to be naming the British Columbia Commissioner in the very near future, beginning of October. And we all hope the parties to agree on the Chief Commissioner very soon after that, so that the Commission can begin its work in November and get on with it. It's a fulfillment of years of determination by Aboriginal peoples and fulfillment of a commitment by my government. We are making this commitment, friends, at a crucial time in our nation's history. It's a time of reflection of every citizen and a time for renewal of this great and wondrous country of ours. And history has brought together a number of events that make these truly remarkable times for our country. I'll never, ever forget the feeling in the room at the recent constitutional meeting in Toronto, where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal leaders reached consensus on Aboriginal self-government. I want you to know, friends, that the room fell absolutely silent as your chiefs spoke one by one, leaders of the First Nations, about how they were committed to this new partnership that we were forging. It was one of the most moving experiences, not just in my 20-some-odd years in politics, but in my life. hear the goodwill and the emotions that we all felt towards each other. And in that Canadian Unity Agreement that was reached between First Ministers and territorial and Aboriginal leaders, the Aboriginal people will have the authority to, and I'm quoting from the final text of the August 28th meeting, to safeguard and develop their languages, cultures, economies, identities, institutions, and traditions, and to develop, maintain, and strengthen their relationships with their lands, waters, and environments, so as to determine and control their development as peoples, according to their own values and priorities, and to ensure the integrity of their societies. Those words in the agreement show that Canadians and their leaders, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, are ready to turn the page and work towards a renewed Canada that recognizes the place and contribution of First Nations. And that is also what we are doing today. We are together turning the page and starting anew. And that's why it's so important that these two events are seen in harmony. The consensus that we reached in Toronto and that was reaffirmed in Charlottetown was historic. The signing today of the Treaty Commission Agreement is the beginning of the fulfillment of that dream. By putting in place a method to reach just and honorable settlements, a body that will be the keeper of the process, we are acknowledging the First Nations' rights to participate in the life of this province as equal partners. And by moving forward on the Canadian Unity Agreement, we will build on this new partnership. Friends, we are important participants, all of us in this room today, in being on the edge of a new history for this country of ours. From here on, we're able to move our nation forward, to be creative and constructive as we build unity between our peoples, to be a shining example to the world of how a country can truly live up to its promise and in peaceful, honorable compromises to work out a unanimous agreement that every citizen in this country will be able to vote on. Can you think of a country in the world where that has happened? What a wonderful example to all the other countries that are falling apart or fighting with each other. Just think of what Canada is saying to the rest of the world here today. Isn't it wonderful to be able to say that you're a Canadian, that we are able to reach agreements in a just and honorable way? So this should be a moment of great pride for all of us and a moment of great hope. And I hope we'll work together so that this hope may flourish in a land of peoples where we're strong and we're united. And friends, I appreciate the busy schedule that the Prime Minister has, and we welcome him to British Columbia. And I can tell you that, as all of us who participated in the meetings, that he was very instrumental in helping some of the leaders understand Aboriginal self-government and moving us towards a successful conclusion. So with that spirit, Mr. Prime Minister, I will be here for the rest of the day to continue that spirit that we established at Charlottetown and in Toronto. I'll have to leave for a short time this afternoon to sign some of the bills and do some other affairs of the province. But I plan to be back here this afternoon to break bread and to be with your Grand Chief Mercredi. So friends, thank you all for participating in such a magnificent day. Doesn't it feel wonderful to be a British Columbian and a Canadian today? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Premier Harcourt. Ladies and gentlemen, Premier Harcourt. Carrying on our agenda, ladies and gentlemen, we call on Chief Joe Mathias from the Squamish Nation, from the Coast Salish Nation.
Elders, hereditary chiefs, honored guests, delegation from the province of British Columbia, delegation from Canada, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, Premier Michael Harcourt, welcome to my village, welcome to my house, welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish people. All of humanity is a great ocean. All that lives flows into the great sea, like so many rivers that flow from the mountains. Our magnificent mountains that stand like great silent persons, sometimes shrouded in clouds of mystery and myth. The source of our beginnings is there in the mountains. The place of our future is there in the great ocean. That is our philosophy. That is our cosmic view of the universe. That is how we relate to our Creator. Our young, our old, our past, our present, all have the same journey to tomorrow. We know this to be the truth for all humanity. And so we find that our destination is the same as your destination, and that our future is the same as your future. And today we gather in this house to embark on a profound journey. We sit in this house with different cultures and different histories. We sit here holding very different views on two very large questions. Aboriginal title, our collective right to our traditional territories, and Aboriginal self-government, our collective right to be a self-determining people. And we know that there exists a great gap between our understandings on these two big, great questions. But that is the challenge. That is the task. Today we have made but one small but very important step towards meeting that challenge. With the signing of the Treaty Commission Agreement, the road ahead of us is set. There is no turning back. The treaty-making process is a negotiation process. It is a process that our past leaders and elders fought for so long in this country, with such great dignity and heart and spirit based on their traditions and their cultures. They fought for it and fought for it for so long. Despite the pain and the hurt, their heads were full of dignity. They have not buried our past because our culture is still alive in this room today. The treaty-making process is a process that is demanded by our present-day leaders and elders. We know that the negotiations will not be easy. We know that agreement on our land, our resources and seas will be difficult to achieve. But we are committed and determined to make treaties with Canada and British Columbia. Not only for our own sakes here in this room, but for the sakes of our children's and their children and their great-great-grandchildren. We as Aboriginal people have faced the long, bitter winter. It is now time for us to walk in the warmth of the summer light. We offer Canada coexistence, not confrontation. We offer British Columbia prosperity, not destruction. We view the treaty-making process as the most civilized way to establish new relations between our people and non-Indian society. Address the truth of our histories, our cultures, our institutions, our lands, our seas, and our resources. Negotiations, in our view, will not be based on that tired old notion of extinguishment. We will not tolerate the extinguishment of our collective Aboriginal rights. Let us set that clear today. Rather, we approach the negotiations with the view of sharing and coexistence. Those two notions are time deep in our history, in our people's history. That is why when that man got lost at sea and bumped himself into this country so long ago, it was such a great, wealthy, beautiful land because we as human beings shared this earth with all God's creatures. We did not exploit, nor did we destroy. That's why it was surviving so well in those days. Today there is wealth enough for all people in this great land. Our aim is to share and to coexist in the bounty that this earth offers all people. It has been said that one learns nothing from success, that one only learns from failure, that experience is a crude teacher. With the signing of the Treaty Commission Agreement today, we now have the opportunity to turn that saying around. Indeed, we have the opportunity to turn history around. The process we have put into motion today affords us the chance to learn all about success for all peoples. Not only for the First Nations peoples, but for the people of British Columbia and Canada. If you think of this, hold up the mirror and look into that mirror today. And look closely. And beyond your own face on that mirror, look beyond your own face. You will see the faces of all those people that have gone before you, looking back at you today. All you leaders and elders, young people, helpers. Today, they would be proud and full of joy in their heart for what you have witnessed here today. And we remind you that when you got paid, you must witness what took place here. You carried in your mind and in your heart on into the future. That is our record. That is our document. Continue to be a good witness today. There is wisdom in the eyes of our old people. Let us learn from that wisdom. And let us do what is right. The challenge is now before us. We must now reach new levels of understandings. We must now educate each other, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, as to our cultural, social, and political beliefs. We must become the true educator and light up the dark corners and lead that path for our coming generations. And together, we must achieve a free, open, enlightened relationship based on treaty agreement so that we will not ever again live in fear of each other as human beings on this earth. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe Mathias. Ladies and gentlemen,